Have you ever been put in charge of something? For us, the idea of being in charge sounds awesome. For others, you would much rather just be in the background. But for me, I've always loved it. Think about it, what it feels like when you've experienced having a little bit of authority. When you're babysitting or you're at your job. If you're the oldest in your family and you have leadership over your younger siblings. If you're the captain of your team or the first chair in your band and everybody's supposed to follow your lead. If you're leading a club or are looked for advice by other friends. Even over something as simple as working hard for your grades. When people have to do what you say or rely on you in a way, it's tempting to want to just be a little more in control, just a little more power, right? But having authority is tricky because we all know what it's like when authority isn't used well. We can list plenty of examples of bad authority figures, but we won't name them. People who have given in to the temptation and put others down so that they could seem more elevated. We swear to ourselves that when we finally gain some power, more influence, or more control, that we'll never abuse it like they did. Okay, so we know what we're not trying to be like when we have the opportunity to have more authority, but how can we make sure that as we gain more power, influence, and opportunities to lead, that we're being the kind of leaders that we would like to follow? How do we handle having authority in a world where putting others down is almost expected from people who come from the top? According to Jesus, it's simple. Not easy, but definitely simple. In fact, Jesus is the best example of how to use authority. Jesus was a regular guy born in a small town in the Middle East, and yet 2,000 years later, we're still talking about him to this day. Even people who don't believe he's the Son of God still can't help but notice the revolutionary things that he taught, things that shook up the world and all of history. A big part of how people talk about him has to do with what he said and what he did when it came to power and people. All people. The people who liked him and the people who wanted him killed. People who followed him and people who betrayed him. People who believed he was the Son of God and people who thought he was crazy. Jesus is in a position of authority and he used his power to do what nobody expected. He led upside down when he used his power to turn regular fishermen into disciples, leaders, and did ministry. He used his power to heal people who were outcasts in society. He used his power to do miracles on days where religious leaders thought rest was more important. He used his power to value and elevate women in a society that disregarded them and used them. In Matthew's account of Jesus' life, he writes down something Jesus said that covers everything we're talking about today. Jesus is talking with people in authority in an ancient Israel, and this group of guys are called Pharisees. They were the religious leaders who held a ton of power and were always on a mission to discredit Jesus. They tried to trip him up by asking tricky questions. In the conversation, one of them straight up asked Jesus what was the most important thing for people to do when it comes to obeying God. This is what the greatest authority had to say. Jesus says the greatest thing that we can do, and check it out what he said. So Jesus is asked very directly, what's most important? And his response is simple, love God and love people. Whoa, 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 whoa. For the 613 laws the Pharisees were following to a T and encouraging other people to follow, there's no way it can be this simple. The problem with 613 laws was some of them left wiggle room, and the religious leaders were the ones with the power to determine exactly what these laws might mean. Take, for instance, the law to forbid working on the Sabbath. Someone had to determine just what counted as work. What was walking work? Was cooking work? Was riding a donkey work? Figuring out the answer to these type of questions was the Pharisees' entire job. And as long as they needed to interpret laws, they could use these laws to tear others down. But when Jesus came along saying that power isn't in interpreting these laws at all, the power is in loving God and loving people, in other words, in the upside down kingdom, power is for lifting up, not tearing down. See, real authority is supposed to be based in love, and using authority in the right way is about loving God, loving yourself, and loving others as well. Think about it this way. When you make sure to get a healthy amount of sleep, or keep a relationship that makes you better, or do your best to think kindly about yourself, that's you loving yourself well. When you choose to honor your parents, respect your teammates, and stand up for others, that's loving others well. And when you're living in ways that honor what God says is best, that's loving God. We have options when it comes to using our authority. We can use power in a way that harms others, or we can choose to lead with love. We can be part of an upside-down kingdom that uses power to build up and not tear down. Another way to say this is authority without love is just poorly used power. And power used poorly never ends well, for the person in power or for the people under their authority. One of the most brilliant and courageous people in history summed up the idea like this. Power used for good is loving. Love, done well, uses power for the purpose of bringing justice and peace to the world. And the good news is, God gives us everything we need to use our authority in a loving way that He says are best. Another writer named Paul, who was one of the most influential leaders in the early days of the church, says it this way. Check it out. God gives us all the power, love, and self-discipline we need to live the way that He says is best. And what does God say is best? To love Him, others, and yourself. That's the way to the upside-down kingdom. This doesn't mean that we'll get it right all the time, but it does mean that God gives us everything we need to get it right the next time we're given the chance. In the upside-down kingdom, power is for lifting up, not for tearing down. If we want to make sure we use any power we have in a healthy way, there are a couple of steps we can take the next time we find ourselves in a position of authority. We can start by choosing to use authority well for others. Think about the way that Jesus used His authority. He didn't use His power selfishly, disregarding those around Him. Instead, He chose to use His power to show His love for all people. In fact, it was the love that took Him to the cross. With all the power in the world, He laid it down so we might not miss the overwhelming message of love that God has for us. That we would see up close the best use of power when it's used to serve others. Jesus demonstrated this power of love through His closest followers and through His enemies. We are supposed to use any power that we have to bring the upside-down kingdom to the world around us. Use authority well for yourself. Use authority to learn to lead yourself to make wise choices on a daily basis. Have integrity to be the same person in private that you are in public, and prioritize your mental and physical health. When you lead yourself well, leading others starts to come naturally. We can all choose to use any authority we have to lead ourselves well so that we can lead others well. Just imagine what this would be like. Imagine a world where we all used our authority in ways that showed genuine love for God through real love for ourselves and others. Leading with love looks like making sure that the kids you babysit don't just feel physically safe, but they feel like you genuinely care about spending time with them. It looks like using your position as first chair in the band to help someone else in your section who could use a little more practice or guidance. It means treating your younger sibling like you love them because God loves them, even when they annoy you and you feel like you're gonna lose it. It means standing up for the classmate who's being left out or being made fun of in class. In other words, in the upside-down kingdom, you use your power in ways the world least expects you to use it. Genocide, murder, gossip, abuse, bullying, and hate. So much of it can be traced back to power without love. On the other hand, when people use authority in a loving way, the world changes for the better. Hungry people are fed, hurting people are healed, and the desperate people experience hope. This is what authority based in love does. This is what Jesus' upside-down kingdom looks like. So what do you want the future to look like? The good news is, every time you have an opportunity that gives you authority, you have the chance to lead with love.